First of all, I want to welcome everybody to our webinar on the 10 things leaders must do to score some big wins in their first 10 weeks. I'm Paula Cizik. I'm the Chief Research Officer here at NOBL, based in Los Angeles, and we're really excited to share with you today all the learnings that we've discovered in working with clients and doing research. And with me today, like I mentioned, is our Managing Director of our LA office. This is Dr. Kim Perkins. She not only has her degree in positive organizational psychology for her PhD, she has also been a professional athlete. So when it comes to high performance, when it comes to leadership, Kim knows a thing or two. We're really excited that she is joining us today and really looking forward to the conversation that we're going to be having with everyone. So diving in today, the reason why we pick this topic is because a lot of times when you have a new leader get into a new position, they are so enthusiastic, right? They are so ambitious that they immediately start thinking about all of the things that they're going to do, right? Like they have a clear plan for what's going to happen. They've got a checklist. They're ready to go. And I'm assuming at least some of you are either new leaders within an existing your old organization, or maybe you've switched over to a new role. And so obviously you want to feel like you're making an impact. But what happens is that leaders are so gung-ho about what it is that they're going to achieve that they sort of forget about the team that they need to bring with them. And that's really what's critical if you're a leader of a team. It is getting everybody on board and moving them all forward. And so that's what we're really going to focus on in this webinar. It is, how do you bring your team along so that you achieve those goals together, as opposed to you simply trying to do all of the things. Now, the reason why we are qualified to talk about this is because this is what we do all of the time. At NOBL, we help leaders unleash their teams, right? This is what we do. We work with leaders to identify what are the obstacles in their way, what's their vision, where do they want to get to in the future, and then how do you break that down and actually make that happen? So these on the right are some of the results that we've seen, everything from increasing work balance, increasing overall productivity, and increasing alignment, right? Now, there's three ways that we do this. First of all, there's embedded change, where we actually go in and work with your organization side by side to change the way that the team works. So think of it in a way as executive coaching, but literally for teams. Organizational change really is just behavioral change at scale. And so we love getting in and working with teams side by side to do things differently. Second way is, of course, really common. You've got an offsite, you're bringing people together, you want to focus on one particular topic or one way of working. We can help you come in and design an offsite, which is really productive, but also still fun. We promise no trust falls. We've never done a trust fall to date. We never will do a trust fall. And then a third is, of course, a training program. And this is where you focus on like one particular topic, but maybe it's over a span of time. So it could be anything from Management 101, it could be how to run better meetings, but really, again, working with the team side by side to improve how they work. So that's a little bit about us. Now I want to talk about what we're talking about today. So we're going to try and make this a little bit more interactive for a webinar. We'll see how it goes. The first thing that we're going to do is go through 5 of the things that new leaders need to do when they're in an organization, right? When they've stepped into that new role, what should they be thinking about? Then we'll do a little activity so that you can actually start to think through, okay, what does this look like for me? And if we have an opportunity, we'll actually share things out with the rest of the team. Then we'll do a learn part 2, which is we'll, again, look at the other 5 things that leaders should be considering when they step into that new role. And then another activity to try it out. Finally, we'll close with an ask. So we'll just have an open Q&A session. And if you have any particular questions, we'll do our best to get you an answer to it. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Kim Perkins. And she's going to tell us a little bit about the things leaders should be doing.
Thanks, Paula. So I'm happy to be here with you guys today. And so to get started off, I want to talk about a time when I was a new leader coming into a position. So this was many years ago, before I was an organizational psychologist. I was I had a fantastic new job in an organization as the new editor-in-chief of a magazine. And of course, I came in, like most leaders do, with a plan of all the things I wanted to do differently. And I thought that I was going to show up and reveal my beautiful plans, and everybody was going to applaud and get immediately on board with it, because it was obviously so much better than what we were doing before. And that is not how it went. And so, in fact, I was amazed to find all kinds of resistance. And there was a lot of very legacy habits that people had that were puzzling to me. And I found instead that if I had known then what I know now, I could have made things go a lot easier. And so these 10 things that leaders do in order to position themselves for success comes, as Paula said, both out of our experience and also out of the organizational psychology literature. And I'm going to just give you a quick summary. I'm not going to read these through. We're going to dive into each one. But in general, we find that leaders tend to come into it from a very cognitive place, a lot of planning. And in fact, what people really need to do is just get a good look at those leaders. You know, they need to get a sense of who they are as people. Your team is going to want to know what's in it for me, what do people need from me, rather than being able to immediately get on board with the new vision. So as we go through these, we're going to talk about some of the things that leaders often get wrong and how we can correct that, and some simple ways to make that happen. So first, let's get aligned on what leadership is and isn't. If we have 10 people in the room, and I think we have 45 right now, I bet there are 45 different definitions of leadership in this room, and that's fine, because leadership is a very personal thing. But here's our definition. And so leading is the art of getting work done with and through other people. If you're completely new to leadership, if you're coming from being an individual contributor, chances are good that you got promoted because you were really good at getting your own work done. And it looked as though you could see the bigger picture on this. However, what most new leaders find is that they have to make a shift. Now they are not managing tasks and work as much as they're managing people. And that's generally not something that, let's just say, those skills that got you here will not get you there. And that's partly why we're emphasizing the art of managing people rather than just tasks and just strategy at this point. So the first thing that people do often when they come in is they think about their resume. They tell their team, you know, I've been through all these fabulous things, and here are all the things that I'm doing that have qualified me for this position. That we don't find that that's really what people want to know. That tends to create distance, when in fact what you want is for people to know you as a human. What we find that followers really want from their leaders is to get to know them so that they can predict what's going to be important to them and predict how they will behave. Your resume will not tell them this. Instead, we suggest that you tell them your story. So what are 3 events that are really important to making you the person that you are today? So perhaps when I introduce myself to a crowd, often I do that by talking about my speed skating career, and by the story I just told about my journalism career. And hopefully I'm hoping between those things, people can put together who I am out of that. Not that I am some award-winning person that they should immediately fall in line to follow, but more that they can see what's important to me and what's shaped me as a person. And being open about this can really humanize you and make people, it gives you they call it a close charisma as opposed to a distant charisma, by having this kind of understanding. So the next thing that people need from you is, a lot of times leaders come in and they want to wipe the slate clean. So we talk about this when we talk about organizational change. Counterintuitively, it's more important to honor the past. And so we recommend that new leaders go on kind of a listening tour, in fact, to see what has been going on in the department and where people are at now. So rather than telling people where you want them to go, this is a time to find out what the team has done to get where they are today, because they will be, even if it has been, and we honestly work with a lot of leaders where this is the case, if it has been a toxic workplace in the past, there will still be attachment to the ways that got them here. So for example, if it's been a very command and control situation where if you are, as an employee, told to jump, the next question should be how high. Even though people can see that that's not a great situation, there'll still be some attachment to it. And so this is the time where leaders can spend your first month learning what is important to people and what has been going on, rather than jumping into where we want to go from here. So these processes, of course, can take place simultaneously, but if you don't honor the past and understand where people are coming from, you will not be able to get people to move along with you. So after you've done that, then it's possible to start envisioning the future. And when you're envisioning the future, on the next slide, one of the things that you want to definitely watch out for is telling people where you want them to go without understanding where they are at today. So when we say what opportunities are the team uniquely qualified for, that's both you as a strategist thinking about where we want to go from here and what's best for the organization, but looping in some of what the team feels to find is important to them in the places that you can. This is a change management technique, in fact, and then we'll talk a little bit more about that, how that plays in later. But you as the new leader are the person who's going to set the tone, but that doesn't mean that you are the only person who gets to say what happens. So when you're coming in, especially if you're coming in from an environment that has been more toxic, it may be difficult to get information out of people. And the idea here is to be gently persistent. People do not change on a dime. And if you're following a leader in particular who had a low trust situation, it's going to take a minute for people to adjust and trust you. Just you saying that you're trustworthy and that things are going to be different is really not enough. And that's where it comes in to needing to establish ground rules for relationships. What behaviors do you want to encourage? And the use of the word behavior is really precise here, because a lot of times we find leaders come in with a specific idea about what attitudes they would like to establish. We would like people to take more ownership of the work, or we would like people to have more relaxed relationships with each other. Those are attitudes, not behaviors. It's going to behoove you to think about how would you know if this were happening? How would you know if people were taking ownership of your work? What behaviors would you see around them? If people were feeling relaxed with each other, what behaviors would you see? And that way you can both you can tell people what you want directly, and also you can set a tone where people can have those behaviors and that you can establish those by role modeling them as well. And in fact, setting the tone is one of the things that we think is most critical for leaders to do. So when we're thinking about setting the tone, what we really want is for people to think about how you would know if you were an employee, use your empathy. If you were an employee working with you, how would you know that this is what you wanted? How would you know that the new leader wanted things to be different in what way? So sometimes this can be environments. This can be looking at what kind of vibe you want. So perhaps if you want your meetings to be less formal, for example, so that people have higher psychological safety and feel that they can share information better, maybe you can try moving them to a coffee shop for a couple of times so that people can kind of get in the idea of this. We often recommend, we have a lot of meeting plans that are fairly easy to get to the results that you want without having to think too much. So if you wanted to start messing around with those, start introducing some meeting plans to make the meetings the way you want them, and do it as a sort of a trial basis. Hey, we're going to try to do a thing differently here and see what happens. And again, people may not get, if people do not get lined up behind you immediately, you should not take it as a sign that this is not going to work or that they do not want to do it. There's always a hangover from the last leader, and it's going to take a minute for them to change directions and trust you. One of the other things that we find works with this is to do a little ritual that we call user manuals. And so when we're doing user manuals, what we're doing is we are revealing a little bit about the way we like to work and hearing about how the other people like to work too, in a very personal way. And what I'd like us to do now is I'd like us to try out how we do this. So Paula is going to get us set up in a way to do this in an interactive session.
Certainly going to make the attempt. So yeah, what I would like you guys to do is to look at this list of questions, right? What does it look like when you disagree? Or how do you respond in a crisis? These are really individual questions that are going to test your level of self-awareness. I know that I've actually had a colleague when I was under a lot of pressure. I was running, right? Like, cause that's how important it was. And he actually said out loud, he's like, oh man, when Paula's running, you know, things are in trouble. And so that's one thing. Like, if you see me running, you had better start running with me. But it's a test of self-awareness. So what I want you to do is really just pick out one or two of these questions that really speaks to you. You think you have a pretty good understanding of how you react, or maybe it's one where you don't necessarily know how you react and you want to think it through, or you want to go find information. So what I would suggest for right now is pick one or two and think it down. Maybe actually jot it down. And I will see if I can't get the Q&A section up so that we can have potentially people share how it is that they react to some of these questions. So we'll give everybody just a couple of minutes to, like I said, think through a couple of these questions, figure out how it is that I respond as a leader. So go ahead, think things through. Just another minute or two. All right, and so what I'm going to ask is for volunteers. So you should be able to raise a hand, and that should allow me to see that you are raising your hand in this system, and we'll have you share out. So if you feel comfortable, if someone feels like, oh, I'd love to share like something that I discovered when going through this process, or here's something that I noticed about myself, would love to open it up to you, and I can put you on speaker to the rest of the group. So let me know. Sydney raised a hand, so hold on, Sydney. All right. Hold on just a second. All right, so Sydney, you should be, there we go. All right, so tell us a little bit about it. What question did you answer, and what did you learn?
So the first question that I answered is, how can you be misunderstood? And I think I can often be misunderstood as overly critical and maybe overbearingly intense. And when in reality, I'm really passionate, and I'm trying to be really curious and get to the root of the problem. But sometimes people get defensive and like really on their back foot when I dig into things.
That's a great one, Sydney. I feel that's a perfect example of one where if people understand you better, then there's a real valuable change in how you can get treated.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you, Sydney. All right. I'm going to send you back to attendee. Anybody else want to share something that they learned? Like I said, Lisa, hold on. All right. Allowing to talk. Okay. All right, Lisa, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. All right, so what question did you pick?
The first one I chose was A, and I like to communicate with the team via face-to-face because you can see their body language, facial expressions. So when you ask a question, you can kind of tell if it bothers them or if they can speak freely to you. You can kind of tell by their body language.
That's great.
Second one the second one I chose was letter E.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope to be remembered as the go-to person, meaning easy to approach, very knowledgeable, and can explain things very well.
Great. It's really great that you figure that out, because, you know, there's a lot of different ways that people can lead, and a lot of them are really useful. So knowing who you want to be on the team can be really helpful toward both you understanding what your goals are and other people understanding what's important to you. So well done.
All right, so maybe if we can get one more person to share an answer to one of their questions. Otherwise, we will go ahead and move on. No? All right. We will come back. We will be asking more questions later, but for now, let's get back to it. So,
great.
Yeah, the user manuals essentially, they're a really useful tool for getting people to really start surfacing those implicit behaviors or those quirks that you have. And so this is a really handy way of getting those out and discussing those on the surface. So if you haven't, take a picture of these. We're recording this, so you'll be able to access it later. But try this exercise with your own team and find out what you haven't figured out, right? Like discover what you need to learn about your colleagues. You can even do it with clients, honestly, when you're sitting down with them for the first time. Find out what it is, how it is that they like to be worked with. All right.
It's true. We find that everybody likes to talk about themselves. And so in general, this is something you can take 5 or 10 minutes in the beginning of a meeting and do. And as part of like a normal standing meeting, it works really well.
All right. So jumping into the second half, Kim, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Thank you. Second half. So in the second half, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the planning and strategy stuff that I said was perhaps less important than the people stuff in the first half. But now we're going to talk about those plans that you have for how you want to come into this role and what you want to do the same and what you want to do differently in order to achieve the results that you've been tasked with. So the first thing I like to think about is aligning incentives. What behaviors are rewarded? And when we come into a company to think about culture and help them straighten out their culture or set a culture that will get them companies where they want to go, this is one of the first questions we ask. And so people, you know, the culture is not ping pong tables, as you know. The culture is what people do, what gets rewarded, which tends to promote behavior. And so people automatically think of what gets rewarded in terms of bonuses or in terms of promotions, and that's important. But what's also important to notice is what people do in conversations that tend to earn points, for example. So we worked with a company where you were told that when you first joined the company that in large meetings, if you're a new person, you should not speak. And so that tended to really depress the number of ideas that came up in meetings from people who had different or new perspectives, or by virtue of being more junior, had different experiences that might help them, the market that they were trying to work with. And so if that's a behavior that is in line, then you'd want to keep it. But if that behavior that you find is something that people are obeying all the time and it's not aligned with what you need strategically, then you're going to need to set some ways to get new behaviors out there. So but again, aligning incentives is thinking about what is already rewarded in the culture and what you want to keep and what you might want to set in a different way. So when it's time to make change, you may have run across the idea that there are different types of people you will encounter. So we break it into just 2 groups, champions and cynics. So champions are people who are won over by your program. They want what you want. They want to help make the change, and they're enthusiastic about it. So when you run across people like that, what you need to do is keep them and get them engaged and keep them engaged. They are your new best friends, because they're going to go out and convince all the fence sitters. This way you can stay out of it. They can be down in the trenches winning people over. And so you want to support their ideas, keep them engaged by getting them to help out with, giving them visible positions to help out with the change that you want to make. And then in this way, as people are looking to them to see which way the wind blows, there will be more and more champions on your team. So people generally aren't worried so much about champions because they're the people who agree with us. So what we are interested instead is what to do with the cynics, the people who say this will never work. We tried that before and it didn't work. This company will never change. Things will never be different. And we've all heard these voices, I believe. So what do you do with these guys? The thing to remember about cynics is that they're actually highly engaged people. They're people who care a lot and notice a lot about what's going on. They're not disengaged at all. They just don't happen to generally agree with what's going on. And the reason they don't is because they were once disappointed. Cynics are actually disappointed idealists. And if you remember that, then that will help you deal with them rather than by trying to convince them that you're right and that things can change, but by figuring out what they want and giving that to them a little bit, showing them that the organization can change. One of the ways that I find personally really useful to do this is to interview them and figure out what they want. This can take a little bit more time than you imagine, because the first few times you say, so in this organizational change, what do you want? They're going to be spending a lot of time saying, well, it'll never happen. We can't do it. So it's important instead to say, what I like to do is do just kind of like, I call it like a homeopathic method, where you just put a little drop of change in there. And you say, okay, so I understand and I hear you that you don't believe that the organization won't change, that we're really entrenched, that we can't do it any other way. But if, like, by some miracle, their meteor fell out of the sky and we were able to do something a little bit differently, what would you like to see? And after you ask this for a few times, you may actually get an answer. And usually I find the answer is something much smaller than you would have imagined. You would think these people want to change everything, but somehow just a small gesture will often get them engaged. So we had one person who we asked this of, and they said, we'd like it so that meetings were not held at 6 p.m. We shouldn't be able to we should be able to get through life without having emergency 6 p.m. meetings called. So we went back to senior leadership and said, hey, what if we just tried a little trial, and if it doesn't work, we will try it. We won't have to do it this way, but let's just for a month try not having emergency meetings at 6 p.m. And they went for it. And sure enough, we could get along pretty well without emergency 6 p.m. meetings. And now that was what it took to take that cynic, not just get them on board, but they became one of the biggest champions for change ever, because they could see that things could be different, and we gave them something that they wanted. So to recap, do not try to win over a cynic. Instead, figure out something small that they want, give it to them, and they often can and do become some of your biggest champions. So thinking about the next part, and when we're thinking about planning for the changes we want to make, this is a really small detail. It's going to sound like a small detail, but we find that this has big, big effects. And this is something from the coaching literature, from the psychology literature, and it's about looking out for obstacles and seeing what's in your way when you want to do this. So we do this as part of our kickoff meetings. When we're kicking off a project, we ask people, so if we didn't get the results that we all have been aligning on, let's look, and it helps if it's really put in this way. Like, let's pretend it's 6 months from now and everything went south. What is it that killed this project? And then you have everybody think about that. And in the psychology literature, there's a little trick to looking backwards that makes it easier and clearer what went wrong, rather than trying to look forwards and say what could go wrong. That's harder for our brains to grasp. And so then we have everybody write down what has probably gone wrong from a 6 months in the future view. And then we can take some steps to mitigate it. So that is a small thing that you can build into your meeting planning that we find makes a huge difference in terms of the ability to make change on the fly. And then similarly to that, we always recommend doing retros. So when we have regular retros, we have them in terms of projects at the end of a project, and we also have team retros that are happening along the way at regular intervals, and those are about how we work together rather than about a project. So when we're thinking about how we're working together as a team, by asking what's going well, then what's not going so well, and then what do we want to do about that? What do we want to double down on versus what do we want to see if we can mitigate in some other way? What this does is this gives teams an ability to It really boosts teams' resilience. It gives them an ability to change as necessary on the fly and to believe in their capabilities of changing, which really is so important because we often find that the belief that people can change is what's in the way of actually changing. And so as you do retros and actually act on the ideas that come out of that, that tends to really enhance resilience because people can see that people are able to change, able to adapt, and that makes everybody much less stressed out about the adaptations that are often needed on the fly. That's a lot, right? So let's think about, I want to go back to the champions and cynic parts. Let's think about, this is an interactive exercise, so we'll empower Paula again to call on some people, but we'd like you to think back to a time when you have been a champion or a cynic. Something where somebody wanted to make a change and you're like, that'll never happen, or like, yes, thank God, we finally need this. So how did your leader engage with you in that? How effective was it? What else could they have done? Alternatively, or also, you can think about your current team. Who's likely to be a cynic and who's likely to be a champion, and how might you engage with them? So Paula,
yes,
let it be so.
All right, so I'll give everybody like 1 or 2 minutes, again, to think about that. Either a time when you've been won over, or maybe thinking about your current team, who is likely to be that cynic or champion, and something that you might do to engage with them. Now, just as a warning, this is being recorded and we're going to share it afterwards. So if you don't feel safe naming names, please don't, right? You can make it anonymous, or you can make it more generic than that. So if you have something, think about that for a minute or two, and then again, we'll do raised hands. So don't raise hands yet. Don't get ahead of me. Take 1 or 2 minutes just to think about that, and we'll do a quick share out to the rest of the organization, to the rest of the team. Sorry. So 1 or 2 minutes. Just another minute or two. All right, we have a victim. I mean, a volunteer. It's Kristen. Hold on, and I will bring you up. Okay, Kristen.
Kristen, looks like you're on mute.
Hold on. Just give me a second here. Okay, Kristen, you're still on mute. I think that's on your end.
I see that they're typing in chat, Kristen. Maybe we can take it that way.
Yeah.
We can't get unmuted.
All right. Yeah, Kristen, if you can maybe type some things in, the entire group can see that. Up to you. While you're doing that, anybody else maybe want to share a story? Andreas, great. Hold on just a second. Let me get you up. All right. Andreas. So let me see. You're still on mute. Again, I think that is on your end. No? It says talking's permitted, but I don't see it from your end. Here, let me try promoting to panelist. We'll do it that way. There he is. There we go.
Hello. But you're still on mute, looks like. You know, technology giveth and technology taketh away.
There we go. Now you're on.
There you go. Hey. Okay. Yeah. Just quickly, one person on my team was a big cynic, and I just couldn't figure out what it was until took a few conversations, but in the end, what turned out was that she wanted to work remotely 1 day a week. In the beginning, I was a bit opposed to it because it's not really company policy. But in the end, we found an agreement between the two of us, and her behavior changed completely, basically overnight. And yeah, her performance, her behavior, everything was like night and day.
Yeah, it's amazing. Thank you for that story. That's a great testament to the power of small things to solve what look like could be big, complex behavioral problems. Thank you for that.
No worries.
So moving you back. And then Kristen was able to type some things in, so I'll just share that with the whole group. And she said she's been the cynic before in this situation. Her boss is really great at listening to her and hearing her out, which makes her feel like her perspective was valid, since she is more in the field than her boss is. So that's great.
Yeah,
and I see, go ahead.
I just was going to say, Kristen, that's a great validation for the idea of you don't go to war with cynics. Cynics you think of cynics as allies, and that is how you solve that situation.
All right, Mark, hold on. I am attempting to promote you to panelists so that you can chime in. Give me just a second. All right, you should be on.
Hello, can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Cool. Yeah, I was a champion once for an organization that was transitioning to self-management. I'd already worked for a self-managing organization that was down in New Zealand, and then moved back to the UK. And yeah, the chief exec was kind of thinking, maybe I want to give this a go. So yeah, I was able to sort of champion the idea and then help him decide that it was a good idea. And then yeah, and then be a champion and kind of help get other people on board as well, because there were lots of cynics, and yeah, so it was quite hard. And it went pretty well. But when I look at question 2, how did your leader engage with you? What else could they have done? Yeah, I mean, we worked really well together, but there were some mistakes made. For example, we didn't ask the organization if they wanted to do it. It was a kind of top-down decision to implement a bottom-up yeah, operating system, or whatever we'd like to call it. So that created lots and lots of problems and made the journey really tough. And I wish that I'd have been asked, because I had experience of it beforehand.
Great story, Mark. Thank you. That's it definitely underlines the importance of those listening tours and trying to act on that and bring that information about where people are at and what they want into it. And again, not to have that necessarily dictate your strategy, but to fold it into your strategy so that you can come from a strong place. Thank you.
Yeah. So as you can see, a lot of these things are really simple, right? Like they might be hard to do, but it really is simple. It is going out and asking people, right? It is listening to them. It is trying to make a small change, like letting them be more flexible with their schedules, or putting a limit on when the last meeting of the day is. And so a lot of times people think, oh my God, it's like change, it's this huge overarching, multi-year engagement. But really, if you break it down, like we said, it's just little individual changes at scale. And so that's one of the real key learnings that we found, that people, once they realize that they actually do have more control of the situation, whether it's in terms of learning, whether it's in terms of listening, that's when they really start to get on board with change. All right, back to Kim.
All right, so we've gone through these 10 things that leaders do when they're positioning themselves for success. And we hope that this has been useful to you. This has been a real light touch here, and we have a lot more materials that can help you with this, both on our Academy site and in our offerings. So what I will do now, in the spirit of listening and asking questions, let's open it up for some Q&A.
All right, so on this part, again, you can either, actually, why don't we type it in? If you can type it into the webinar chat, that way everybody can see it, and we'll repeat it, and we'll open it up that way.
And I'll take care of, I see that there's a couple of Qs in the Q&A tab up here, so I'll start addressing those while everybody else types. So when Carol says, when I'm close to burning out, I can't prioritize tasks anymore and say yes or no to random things. I'm not following up on any of my commitments. Man, I wish I didn't know what you were talking about, but I think this is one that we all feel because we're all a little bit burned out. Everybody we know has more tasks than they can possibly get done. And so prioritization becomes the crucial thing. So this is a place where we hope you would be able to ask for your leader for some help and guidance on what's the most important in terms of what they are. We often ask people, say to people that when they're being delegated to, and if you're a middle manager, you are kind of crushed in the middle. You have demands from the people, your direct reports, and also demands from above. And being able to say to your manager, okay, where in the priority list would you like this to be? And what is something that is a lesser priority that I can drop in order to get this done, can really help them come up with their priorities really quickly, because maybe rather than just sloughing it off to you thoughtlessly, they have to decide which is actually more important to them. And that can really help. We have found that really helps relationships. Of course, the immediate thing, well, everybody will say, well, everything's important. Well, you know what? Everything isn't important. And so as we think of strategy as a matter of trade-offs. So basically, if it's too much cognitive overload, then got to release the cognitive overload by getting some of the projects off your plate. And we have a lot of different ways we like to prescribe doing this, but doing it overtly and not just forgetting to do things is generally better.
Right.
Okay. More? Shall I keep going
down?
Yeah,
next question from Franklin.
Okay. If your team is really big, how do you let them share on all these questions? Great question. I would say you would probably be picking and choosing who you're asking. So you'd want to get people at all levels. So if there's some, lower level junior members who are associates, you don't have to get all of them, but get a couple of them for a representative sample. If you have your team is really big, they're not going to share in a big meeting. So a lot of people would have the immediate instincts to call a meeting and get feedback. And if you've got 50 people in a room or more, you're not going to get quality feedback. You're going to have to do this in a series of one-on-one conversations. So if you're co-located, this is like a walking around tour of just like, hey, here's some things I'm thinking about. Reflect on that with me just for a second. And this is an under 10 minutes meeting to get to know your employees and find out what's important to them. And that's where you should be doing more listening than talking. If you're not co-located, then maybe this is setting up some one-on-one chats. We usually recommend that all leaders set up one-on-ones on a regular basis with their employees anyway. If you have a gigantic team, that would probably be all you do, so you're probably not doing that. That's okay. But representative one-on-one interviews where you are doing more listening than talking is how you would do this. And if you're talking about sharing on all the questions in terms of user manuals, then sometimes maybe you can break it down into other team meetings. And so everybody, if you have 150 people, everybody doesn't have to know everybody's user manual. They'll never remember it anyway. So think about it more on small group teams. Like if you've got the less than 2 pizza team, as we've been talking about, then that's where you should do it. Next question. Yeah.
All right. This is from Ilias. This is a great question. Does a coaching culture always help?
What a great question. There's a certain fad for a coaching culture right now, but beyond fads, it's partly because we've been making a big shift in our leadership style from a very command and control hierarchical thing to a very decentralized, flat organization. And because of our, technology and communication methods, we are now in a place, rather than things needing to be centrally dictated, that leaders in some ways have to be everywhere at once. And the only way to get that is a very flat, decentralized, highly psychologically safe culture where information can come out from the people who are on the ground. So that's kind of a big picture, abstract way of saying, most of the time, there's going to be times when you don't want to coach, and that's when it's an emergency and you need to have coordinated action. So I don't want to hear, if I'm the leader and we're having a fire in the building, I don't need to think, well, which exit do you guys want to leave from, right? That's not going to help. Okay. But if it's something short of that, then it's always good to hear where people are at. And even if you hear where they're coming from, and that's not the direction that you're planning to take, that is fine. But it does help to actually mention that out loud. You say, you know what, thank you for your input about this. We're not going to do that because A, B, and C. And that will help you get that's like a rejection letter as opposed to just silence. And that will help you get a better answer next time and keep the psychological safety, because maybe their next idea is the one you really need.
Great. Next, excuse me, next question from Tamara. How would you approach training or teaching someone how to be more curious?
Oh, what a great question. I love the question of curiosity. Curiosity is the antidote to fear. However, can you teach somebody to be more curious? I think it's kind of like leading a horse to water, you know, where you can show them that curiosity is appreciated and show them what the benefits are, but you can't like make them unless they're interested. If it's you want to teach to be more curious, then you can just try it as like a little behavioral habit where you can challenge yourself to do something like next time you talk to this person, ask 3 questions, you know, so that you don't get into your normal habit of doing all the talking or doing all the telling. And that's the way you can change your own habits. But I would say, I don't know if you can teach curiosity as much as you can spark curiosity. And if you're going to spark it in other people, I would say start by asking them about things that they already are in love with. And you being curious about that can help them find ways, can inspire them. That would be you role modeling the curiosity about the things that are important to them.
Great. Okay. Let's do last 2 questions. So first of all, from Becky, what kind of tools have you seen are successful in managing tasks for small remote teams? Have you seen any success or challenges with a program called Notion? We recently started experimenting with it.
Funny you should mention that. We use Notion at NOBL, in fact. And we haven't been using it so much for managing tasks. We use Trello for managing tasks on our own remote teams. And that has worked pretty well. I don't think we've used Notion more for managing the bigger picture of our practices. How do we do X, Y, and Z at NOBL? And that ends up being pretty useful to get people on the same page and to get people onboarded.
Yeah, I'm actually looking. We just published an article on Heart UK about best practices for working with remote teams. So I'm going to hunt down that article and I will put it in the Zoom webinar chat. While Kim answers the last couple questions from Ilias, which is, can reframing influence change over time? And plan change, emergent change in disruptive times, what theories or points of views can help? So Kim, if you would just summarize the theory of change management.
Sure, change management, no problem. Okay, so these are great questions, Ilias. They're very specific questions. And when you say reframing, I'm going to assume that you're talking about reframing of a problem. Basically, the way you're reframing, say, a challenge or a problem into something that's more tackleable, that people have more of a will to tackle. Yes, that influences change over time. Well, I just wrote a piece that about decision making that talks about problem framing as being one of the most key elements. And so I will refer you to that for how to think about reframing in a way that can get people moving. As far as plan change and emergent change in the disruptive times, when our perspective on change is, okay, let me back up. Things are always changing. It's not as though we really have a choice of staying with the status quo, because the status quo is a moving target. Even if right now, if it feels like we're stuck in the status quo, things are changing around us. And so the question is, do we embrace that, and how do we want to get on board with that? And how do we want to respond to that? Because there's no such thing as just sticking with the status quo. That is a lie as far as human behavior goes. So when this is a disruptive time, and it's a really difficult time because everything is changing so fast, and it's changing without our noticing it until we notice. We don't notice. So, and that is something that we know that human beings are uncomfortable with. We like it. We like certainty. Times of a lot of disruption makes for a lot of uncertainty, and nobody really likes that. And that's partly why I think everybody is so on edge about this these days. What theories of point of view can help is pretty much to embrace the wave rather than fight it. And so we've talked about how we do team retros a lot to embrace what's changing. We also do sensing meetings so that we can see and sense what's changing on the ground and decide how we want to respond to that rather than have it blindside us. And those are some of the ways that we find can help boost team resilience and make people change in a more coordinated way, is by acknowledging at the large scale, the fact that everything's changing, the constant change around us. And one of the things that also makes people more resilient is to feel like they're not in it alone. So if you can heighten the bonds on your team, get more psychological safety, get people being able to talk about the elephants in the room rather than deal with the elephants on their own time or in their own head or by talking to their spouse or their friends or whatever groups, then that is going to do a lot to help people's resilience for dealing with these changing times. Great questions. I wish I would need two or more whole webinars to answer these questions, honestly.
Yeah, don't worry, we will be having more webinars. So, all right. So what I wanted to do was basically thank you guys for attending this webinar. We hope that you have found it useful. If you like the material that we've presented, if you want to learn more about how to be a better leader, how to design better culture, we've actually recently launched a site, which is the Academy, which is where we have all of our tools, our exercises, our practices for how you can actually start to implement this. And you'll find some of the material that we discussed today on the Academy. So we've created a special coupon code for you. It is 10 by 10, 10x10, and it'll give you 20% off all subscriptions. So check it out at academy.nobel.io. And we would love to have you subscribe. And we'd love to have you send us feedback and say, hey, like, this is what I would like to learn more about. Here's what I'd like to see on the Academy, because this is for you. It is building out your knowledge base. So with that, I'll once again say thank you. We're going to be releasing the recording shortly after this. If you have any questions, you can always send us a note at heart@nobl.io, and I am typing that in the panel right now. So that's our email. And we really look forward to hearing from you guys and hope you found this useful. So thanks again, and we hope you have a productive Tuesday.
Thank you. Bye.
All right. Thanks. Bye, everybody. Yeah, they don't let me put in apparently emails. So heart@nobel.io. Bye, everybody.